we're just going to wait a moment here, and as soon as we can see that it's broadcasting to YouTube, we'll check and see who's shown and who's not.
Great.
Get a sense of what that looks like.
I'm going to check out YouTube myself.
Sure.
I have this other screen open that says Cultivated Life Design Zones of Brilliance and Showcase. I don't even know.
It's just me, so you don't have to worry about it at all.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Well, how about we get started?
Wonderful.
We're just going to wait a moment here, and as soon as we can see that it's broadcasting to YouTube, we'll check and see who's shown and who's not.
Great.
Get a sense of what that looks like.
Sounds like I should turn off YouTube.
I'm going to check out YouTube myself.
Sure. Yeah, you might need to turn that off.
Open that says Cultivated Life Design Zones of Brilliance and Showcase.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Karin, for having me here today. It's such a pleasure. For everybody who's watching there, Karin connected with me through Bonita Ford of Eastern Ontario Permaculture Institute, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Bonita's a wonderful practitioner over on the east coast of Canada, and we met down at the International Permaculture Convergence. And she, I believe, is a guest on your program, a guest on the Grow Your Permaculture Thrivelihood, which is a 6-month intensive cohort of women who are wanting to create their permaculture business. So,
yes, and I was so excited when Bonita connected me with you, because so much of the work that we'll be doing is around finding our niche, and I love that you've put that into a framework, and thanks so much for taking the time today to share it with my cohort.
It's my pleasure. Totally my pleasure. If there's anything else, Karin, I think we might just jump right in.
That's perfect.
Okay, great. Well, to everybody who's watching, thanks so much for taking the time to be involved in this and also to be involved in permaculture. It's a large piece to be working on, and I'm very grateful that you're working in it. My name is Javin Kurbanakevich. I own and operate a couple of businesses. I own and operate Permaculture BC, which is a permaculture hub for British Columbia, which is the westernmost province of Canada. I also operate All Points Land Design, which is a consultancy-based business for regenerative practices and ecological solutions. So we work on small-scale, small urban lots all the way up to 3,000-acre properties, doing full site design and implementation. And then over the last couple of years, I've been foraying more into this type of work called Cultivated Life Design. We have a lot of life design and life coaching and all that, and I was involved in personal development back when I was 13, and I always thought, it's an interesting place to be in, but they're always saying, make $1 million, go do this and go do that, and there was never a lot of morals or ethics involved with any of that. I thought that was a bit weird. So when I came into permaculture, just a short 5 years ago, I saw it as being a really robust tool for life design, because when we design land, we don't just design the land, we design it with an intent and a life component for the people who are involved. So my road has been, over the last 5 years, I took my PDC over on Vancouver Island at OUR Eco Village, took a teacher's training with Jude Hobbs, incredible female permaculture practitioner and powerhouse. If you're going to be taught how to teach permaculture, I'd highly recommend her teacher's training. She's out with Cascadia Permaculture. She also created or helped to resurrect the Permaculture Institute of North America, or PINA. And then over the last 5 years, I've been involved with a few different enterprises. I've also been involved with starting and selling microgreens business over in Victoria. Did that for about 6 months and found that part of why I didn't like it so much is I hadn't really taken stock of my skills and my attributes and how I like to work. And so this is how a lot of this has come to pass. During the call, I'm going to be switching back and forth between this view, which is you see me and my snake plant that has decided to fall over a bit because it got too big. And we'll be switching back to some slides that I prepared for you to help sort of tease some bits. So with that, I'm going to start with a bit of an intro that I worked up for Permaculture Voices, which is one of the largest convergences of permaculturists, put on by Diego Footer. And in that, I started to spread a little bit of this information about what we're doing and how we're trying to do it. So yeah, we'll jump into that as we have it. So today we're going to be talking about cultivated life design, and really the focus or the tool we'll be talking today is zones of brilliance. So what are your zones of brilliance is the major thrust of this, and this is built upon the permaculture zones. Again, my name is Javin K. Bernakovich, or as I was telling Karin Bernakovich is the Ukrainian accented way of saying it. And if you are interested in learning more about the offerings within this work, Permaculture BC is the website to take a look. So Byron Katie has this beautiful quote called, "Discomfort is the call to set yourself free." And it's that discomfort that has most of us pushing towards finding and trying to free a lot of what we've come to realize is a very domesticated way of being. We've become domesticated humans, and a big portion of what we do within permaculture and in a lot of our work is to set that free and become wild humans again. So there's a couple of analogies we can use here. One of them is there's the landscape that we see out there, the landscape of people and place and application. Now, the majority of us are in this cohort or in this work because we see that there's a need in the world. There's a problem. A need that Michael Pollan, Joel Salatin, Jeff Lawton, and Elaine Ingham, and many others have said is real and urgent. The need to apply design, strategies, and techniques and patterns to this incredible degradation of land. And if this is the case, if, as we've read and we've seen, that there is no place on Earth that is not degraded, that does not have some sort of degradation, be it loss of culture, loss of language, loss of biodiversity, loss of ecological functionality, it means that we need to get to work. It means it's all hands on deck. We need absolutely everybody at their highest capacity. Now, mostly in permaculture, what I found as I was going through my own education and also starting to host courses and teach the components that I felt comfortable with and bringing in high grade information through other experienced permaculture educators, is that the majority of permaculture wanted to make designers and only designers, and some people wanted to make teachers. Some wanted to make teachers, but most people, it's the designer that needs to be made. But if it is this situation, if we are at 6x, if we are at the Anthropocene and potentially the extinction of the Anthropocene, the end of the human era, where we have changed our landscape so dramatically, then what we need everybody doing exactly what they're good at in exactly the way that they're good at it. So that means we need, as one gentleman came up to me after Permaculture Voices, we need people who are as robust in their understandings of permaculture to be as robust as their skills. So he was a mechanic, and he came up to me after Permaculture Voices. This was part of the process I delineated to them. And he goes, I've been horrible at composting ever since I learned about it. I've just been bad. And I've never really made good compost. And that's been a bit of a problem for me. But I'm a heavy-duty mechanic. I've always been a heavy-duty mechanic. Now that I see your process and understand this, I realize I'm a heavy-duty mechanic who has a permaculture inkling, and that's how I want to apply myself. And just seeing his excitement out of this whole process and the freedom he had around this, it was a pretty special thing to see, because not everybody does that. Not everybody understands that they can be exactly who they need to be, and they just need to retool a bit. So getting back to our idea here about all hands on deck, if we go back to that landscape idea, the big question, and this is a question I've asked a few people, Darren Doherty and others, and we all tend to agree, what's the most limiting factor in your design? We talk about this in permaculture, the limiting factor. What is the most limiting factor in your design, in your life design, in your business design? Well, that would be your personal energy. That would be the direction that your personal energy takes, because although it's regenerative and it's a renewable resource, it is limited, and if we apply it in different places, it tends to become a degraded aspect. So it's that human landscape we want to take a look at, and far being it from having sheep that graze all over our noggin. The big thing we need to realize is, how do we know a human landscape is degraded? Well, probably that we're alive because we've been through this cog box mentality in education, where the K to 12 education and the post-secondary education is really to create consumers. It's to create a consumer culture. This anti-participatory isolationism where we do not interact, where we isolate ourselves so that way we consume each other and we consume everything so we can meet our needs. That's king, and that's why permaculture has in its roots that the most important thing, the prime directive, is to take responsibility for ourselves and for that of our children. And after that, we have the ethics. So Karin and I were talking a bit about having information structures or structures to hang information on. Well, this is one of those pieces. We need to stop this process. We need to become consumers. We need to stop being consumers and start being producers. Part of that is getting rid of some of the education that we've had, and this idea of being busy is the most important thing. That we have to constantly be working and constantly be outputting. Well, this is one of the first major leverage points where we can start to push this idea right off of our mental landscape, which is it's actually quality of life we're after. We're after a quality of life that allows us to do and live the way we want. And if we go to that idea first, it means everything else supports that. So if we have multiple income streams, it supports my quality of life. If we have different ideas, it supports the quality of life. But it's not the job or the business that's the important piece. One of the last things I want to talk about is this word about failure. Failure used to be a really big issue for me. It used to be a large component of my life and a large obstacle to me. But I like going to the roots of things, because once we go to the roots of things, we tend to find that there are a lot of solutions within the roots of things, or the causes. Well, the root word of fail is failure, which is to trip or to fall, or to be deceived, which means that this big word of fail is actually just to be deceived or to trip up on our way to success. It has nothing to do with the worst of the worst, the most horrible of the horrible. It actually just has to do with us moving forward into what and how we need to see it. So this created my slogan, or my adage for Permaculture BC, which is Malor de facere, or fail better. We've been failing for so horribly for so long. We take a look at all the problems of our Earth as it stands today. It's time to fail better. And we do that with high-grade information, with high intent, and with focus and determination. Now, we'll contrast this with how most of us got into permaculture, which was the permaculture buffet. We walked down the 12 or 14 days, or maybe 80 or 144 hours, all depending on how we took our first initial permaculture design course, or whatever we took in life. This is analogous to whatever we took. We walked through life and we had a bit of buffet. And there's some leavings left over from that. There's some things that have been eaten. But what I found in teaching and hosting permaculture design courses is that at the end of the design course, there was a few people, most of them, but a few people who were pretty driven, and they would go on to maybe do something. Out of 25, 35 students, maybe one or two. Well, most of them would do what Toby Hemingway calls the big yellow dog of permaculture, which is they'd go up to their family members after it was all done. They'd be like, hey, I want to tell you about permaculture. Let me just shake all this off on you. Oh, do you like that? Do you like that? And our friends and our family go, what are you doing? I don't even understand what you're talking about. You're talking in jargon, and a jargon that I don't understand. And then they would do the permaculture pilgrimage. The big yellow dog would wander from this to that, to this to that, to this to that. And they would take 1 or 2 years until finally coming to, I really need to do something about permaculture. And this is how a lot of people come to Cultivated Life Design and my work, is that they've taken their PDC for 4 or 5 years ago, and now they're finally ready to do something with it. And just a bit of a quote to example that I want to be around people that do things. I don't want to be around people anymore that judge or talk about what people do. I want to be around people who dream and support and do things. And move forward. This is really where I think most of us, in terms of a permaculture ethic, come together. We want to do something, but the big thing is, after we come out of this process, is where's the map? How do we know what's out there in permaculture? How, can I make a business? How do we populate this map? Because most of us look at this and it's just a white piece of paper. It's just, I know that I'm there, I'm in that city, and I need to move someplace, but where is it? And far be from that, most of us don't actually have that path, that travel path, and getting a sense of how far we've traveled. You know, this is just a little Google map shot, but just getting a sense of how far we've traveled is a big thing. You know, Joseph Campbell, I think, did us a disservice with that idea of follow your bliss. You know, follow your passion, follow your bliss. I don't think that's enough. And then the other piece is, you know, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I also think that was a bit misleading because I've worked at what I've loved and I've been very tired and frustrated at the end of the day. It's not always totally regenerative. But there's more to this story. And it starts a bit with Walt Whitman to say we re-examine all we have been told at school or church. I call this cog education, to make us cogs. Or in any book, dismiss whatever insults your own soul. So much of this comes on what are you doing, how are you operating, and really let's take a reflection point and ask the question of how do I know I'm in what I love doing? Well, you know, Joel Salatin, this is an image that Joel passed on to me, you know, being happy as a pig in shit. Being in that place, being in that zone of brilliance, you know, that's a pig at its highest biological imperative, or as Joel Salatin would say, highest biological imperative. It's about placing ourselves in the aspect, in the environment with the materials that we know we can do incredible things with, just exceptional things. And so the two most important days of our lives are the day we were born and the day we find out why. What are we here to do? What is our aspects to do? And the reason why I have so many quotes, the reason why I have so many of these pieces is we have the ability to make friends with the imminent dead. That's to say, we can go back through time and we can pick up the people who have been most influential and we can make friends with them by reading them and connecting with them and understanding different operational systems. This is standing on the shoulders of giants, those who have come before. And one person, a few people who came before were David Holmgren and Bill Mollison. And these two folks put together permaculture, right? They put together permaculture in '78 as a thesis project for David Holmgren. And they pulled out all these really interesting pieces. One of them was, you know, analysis of an element. And guess what? You are an element. You have needs, you have products and behaviors, and you have intrinsic characteristics that allow you to be your function. Because each one of us has a biological imperative, a biological function. So at this point, a lot of people who've been in permaculture go, okay, that's great, but like, how do I get a job? Well, sorry, your dream job in permaculture doesn't exist. You have to create it. I was talking with Ryan Hill, a poker player turned permaculture aid worker. You know? There's a niche in and of itself, who works with Jeff Lawton and with the Muslim Aid Society, who's going to Yemen, and they're helping to resettle 500,000 refugees in Yemen, in these refugee camps. That's a big niche. That's a place for somebody to really apply themselves. So if your dream job doesn't exist, if you have to create it, well, how do you do that? Well, this is where the process I developed it comes into play. It's called Cultivated Life Design. It includes permaculture, it includes personal development, it includes classic business design. It includes a lot of different pieces. Now, in talking with Karin really wanted me to focus in on this Zones of Brilliance piece, which is, if we take a look at this circle, it's observation, assessment, and problems within that three function piece. Well, just to give you an example, on the left is Lindsay Meads, who came with myself and Ron Barazan to Cuba last year. We run a 3-week permaculture design course down in Cuba. 2 weeks of farm design and tours and eating and breeding amazing cultural fare from the Cubans, and also just connecting with each other. And so there's 2 points I want you to take from the slide. One is, what is the resolution of the tools you're working with? That's called an optical sight level she's holding there, and that's a foldable leveling rod that Mary's holding there. And this is a great tool. This is a great tool for under 25 feet. The margin of error is within acceptable limits, and we can use that tool. So if we're doing life design, we also have to think, okay, we need to use good tools. Well, I helped Lindsay in educating her PDC and giving her some design tools and helping her create something called a holistic goal and a holistic context. And with that, she went back to Calgary, quit her job in Calgary with the city of Calgary, and started Regenerate Design, which is her own design company. She's been profitable and successful in her own design company within months of leaving the PDC, really. So a success story comes to what are the design tools we use. So one of the design tools I use in client design now, it's mandatory for clients I work with, it's mandatory for students I work with, which is called Holistic Management Decision-Making Framework. Holistic Management was created by Alan Savory. Brilliant model, brilliant application, and really it comes down to this. When we go to clients, and with the original permaculture model, we go up to clients, and clients, we ask them, what do you want? What is it that you want? And what do our clients tell us? I don't know. I don't know what to do. And this is the same thing with permaculture application. We need to understand what the destination is. So the destination here comes into what is holistic design. What are these holistic pieces? So we'll leave that for now. It's just something I wanted to chat about. And if you get a chance, really go in and take a look at that. It's one of the most important tools I've seen. I've modified it for life design, but really take a look at that. A couple of folks we worked with just north of here at Darfield Earthship. I'm in Vernon, the interior of British Columbia. They told us, Sandra Burkholder and Chris Rathman, they said our holistic management decision-making framework is the most important tool on the farm. So I really encourage people to take a look at that. We put in the initial landscape there and started their food production system. But what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about this major piece here, this functionality piece, and we're just going to make it as simple as possible. So what are these three pieces we're going to take a look at? Well, we're going to take a look at what are your skills, attributes, and traits, what are your interests, and what are the local world problems that you see, and where those three overlap. This is that Venn diagram, and I was on a call with Living the New Economy founder Nicole Moore yesterday, and she made a good point. She's like, "Who's Venn? Who's this Venn guy? Why does he have to get this diagram?" But still haven't looked into that, Nicole. So if you're on the call, if you're listening at some point in the future, here's me saying I'm going to look into that at some point. But this overlap, these are the possible niches to explore. And why do I say possible? Why don't I say this absolutely exists for sure, 100%? Well, it's because you need to do some testing. And just like Dan Savage, who's a relationship coach down in the States and columnist, says, all relationships fail until they succeed. All niches fail until they succeed. All niches fail until they succeed. So you might be coming into this cohort program with Carl thinking, I'm going to find my one true niche. And you know what? If you do that, I think you're going to be taking a step back, because that's silver bullet mentality. That isn't biodiversity. That's back with the conventional way of thinking about things, that there is one thing that's going to save us, And you have to realize there's going to be multiple niches. One of the business advisors that I chose for my business said, your first business is preparation for your second business, which is preparation for your third business. If you really are interested in becoming a producer, you're going to have multiple businesses. It's just the name of the game. But you get better at every single one, I can guarantee it. So what's this process I developed called Zones of Brilliance all about? Well, it was a way to help students in a permaculture design course synthesize and filter everything they learned about and all that they were, and all the things they saw that were a problem in the world, and to really take that up and be able to find out what exactly ignited them, what exactly totally fired them up. So I created this process called Zones of Brilliance, and it's based upon the zones of permaculture. So the zones of permaculture are about frequency of visitation and the needs of each of these different aspects. Where are we going to be, and where are these different elements within the landscape? And I was looking at this one day and I said, well, how do we apply that to people? If we are in zone 0, if we are the center of all initiative in our designs, how do we use that? How do we apply that in a larger context? How do we use all that we have at our disposal? How do we use all of our gifts, all of our talents, and really be able to show up completely with the value, not to just other people, but to ourselves? How do we show up with everything we are and really help people to understand that here's this great thing I have, I really want to show it to people, I really want people to understand it. How do we do that? Well, permaculture is this interesting system to hang information off of. I love how Karin says that. It's so brilliant. Like, we need these informational structures to hang pieces of information off of. So zones is a way to do that. It's it's basically an energy transaction or an energy audit system. And if you remember in your PDC, and maybe you got taught this or not, I don't know, but there's that first energy audit of regenerative, generative, and degenerative. Regenerative, we have more than what we had before. Generative, the same as what we had before. Also, synonym for that is sustainable, right? We need to move beyond sustainability because I don't want to sustain this culture. This is not a culture I want to be sustainable. I want to be regenerative first and then sustainable. I don't want to have this going on forever. And then below that we have degenerative, less than we had before. The great thing about this energy transaction, these three pieces, it's a quick model that we can apply to anything and really how to come back to us quickly. Is this useful? Is this not useful? You know, where's it going? I was teaching a junior high class about permaculture, and they were great. You know, you talk to them about plants, they kind of look at you a little weird. We've been so removed from nature throughout our lives that they don't quite understand when I give them examples that use plants. So I said, well, you're in junior high, you've got a lot of hormones, you've got some of the largest drugs running through your system that propel you, testosterone and estrogen and serotonin and you've got dopamine, you've got all these chemicals running through your body. You probably have a lot of emotions going on. And they all said, yeah, it's really emotional. It's very true. A lot of turmoil in junior high. I said, okay, I remember that a bit. So I said, so do you have anybody in your life that you find is regenerative? You have a conversation with them and you're just totally on cloud nine afterwards, and they all go, yeah. Okay, great. Do you have anybody that you have a conversation with and it's kind of like, oh, that was all right, and a lot of them are like, mostly our teachers, which is again a great reflection on COG education and how we need to move beyond COG education. And then I said, well, how about degenerative? And they all kind of looked at me and they said, yeah, there's a lot of vampires, a lot of emotional vampires. Whenever I do my invitation of junior high kids, they always end up as surfers. So if you're a surfer, it's not against you, it's just but they really had this process where they go, yeah, so, okay, I get it. So regenerative, generative, and degenerative. And say, so what do we want to invest in? We want to invest in, and this is the same order of investment of resources within the permaculture framework. We invest in resources that produce, just like in regenerative, we invest in things that produce, first and foremost. So why would we go searching for skills? Why would we go searching for interests that we might not actually like? One of the number one questions I always got asked when I was doing my introductory to permaculture conversations, which was, what do we grow? What should we grow? I always thought it was a weird question. What do you eat? What business should we make? What business do you enjoy? I don't like business. Don't make a business. Yeah, but I have to. No, you don't. You will waste all of your energy doing that. Don't do that. That's not for you. And this is how we start to take this zone concept and we start to apply it to life. So we put 1 unit of resource into this framework of zones, into zone 1, and we get 10 back. We put 1 unit of resource into zone 5. I mean, this departs from the permaculture idea of zones, but and we sometimes get a tenth of that back. So we get 10 cents on the dollar we invest, or we get 10 cents, tenth of the calorie we invest. Because really what we're talking about is return on energy investment. What do we put in and what do we get out? I like doing these talks. I like this type of work. I like this cultivated life design stuff. I've always liked it. When I was a kid, I did this with friends in junior high. I like solving their problems, and it has to do with how I was raised and the problems I worked at. Casey Caroline talks about our greatest wound is our greatest strength. I don't feel skilled to talk about that during this time frame we have, but I'll leave that with you as a little nugget. What are the wounds that I've had, and what are the muscles I've had to build around those issues. So a little bit of disclosure here. I think it's important because when we go into this work, we really have to be quite honest with ourselves. I was highly depressed for about 12, 13 years. I was suicidally depressed, so more so. I was in that place, every single day. It was horrible. It was horrendous. Worst thing ever. Now that being said, when I went to the establishment, when I went to the COG establishment, I said, okay, listen, this is how I'm feeling. And they said, well, what are some of your issues? And I said, well, it feels like the world's going to just shit. I don't know what to do about it. And they go, oh, well, we've read about that. That's called eco despair. We've got these great pills to take that away. It's when you think the world is going that way. And I left it. I was like, I don't think that. I know that. That's a fact. That's not a belief system. So anyways, I went through other processes to get myself out of depression, but part of it was permaculture, because permaculture has this great adage, and going back, I don't know where I picked it up, but it's called Action Dispels Despair, or ADD, or Ad Permaculture. When we are in action, we cannot be in a transitory state in the future and the past. We can't be in regret, and we can't be in hope or fear of the future. We can only be present, which means that if we are in action about anything we're doing, we are actively dispelling anything that could potentially be a negative aspect coming into our lives. And yes, positive affirmations, they have some application. There's also some great research that says that there may be some cognitive dissonance and some things that actually don't work so well with affirmations. But what I liked about this was, if I'm in action, if I'm doing, then this makes a lot of sense. So if you are, in this cohort and you are serious about creating a business, which I'm sure you are, if you've invested 6 months of your time with Car and you've invested your energy and you've put other things on hold, action is the big thing. And starting today, that's the backdrop of both of my monitors. It says start today. That's all I have up. I don't have a photo. It just says start today. Whatever I want to be doing, it's to start today. So let's start about this process, and let's start to dive a bit more into it. So again, there's that zonation process, but we're talking a bit more about a process that I developed, which was a way to take a look at a filtering process. So this is the framework we'll be taking a look at. This is the framework we'll be looking at for all of these 3 areas: your interest, your skills, your traits, and your attributes, and then also what are the local world problems that you see. So what are zones of brilliance? Well, it means that there are these zones within us that we can place. Let's just talk about our interests, let's say. So let's say we've gone through a PDC and we're going to do a little evaluatory process. We're going to say all the different things that we really enjoyed in life. So let's take two big things. Let's take community activism, and let's say mapping. Map making for some people is the worst of the worst, and for other people it's the best of the best. So we've got map making. Well, let's take map making and let's ask ourselves a few questions. Do we enjoy map making? No, we do not. Okay, so we don't enjoy map making, so that places it within zone 4 or zone 5. Do we have skill in map making? Nope, we do not have skill in map making. Okay, so that puts it firmly in zone 5, and let's take one last filtering question. When we do make our maps, do we feel better afterwards? Do we feel like we have more than we had before? Nope, so it's definitely not regenerative. So that interest is firmly in zone 5. That is a zone 5 interest. I like to say that those are the skills that we just observe. We just observe those skills. We know, or those interests, pardon me. Those interests, we just observe them. Those are out there, we know that they're there, and we try to navigate so we don't fall into the trap of doing them. That can be sort of the leg hold trap. We don't want to travel all the way up to zone 5. If we have things at zone 1 that we can eat and we can consume, we don't need to go all the way out there.
So Javin,
yeah.
To ask a question.
Go for it.
If I enjoy mapping and I don't have the skill, but I do find it regenerative, then it would be in my zone 2, correct?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just noticing right now, for some reason, that this says zone 1, 2, 2, 4, 5. Huh. So for anybody playing the home game, it should read zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we'll see if the other ones have done that as well.
Okay, so yeah, so in that, then what I just said, that example would be zone 3, actually.
Yeah, it would be sort of 3, 4. Yeah,
okay.
For sure. What we'll find really quickly here, though, is that our major focus is to see everything that's in zone 2 to 5 and everything that is in zone 1, because we're trying to activate really quickly and get into a good business model. And so think of zone 2 to zone 5 as being interesting thoughts and thoughts to be aware of, but especially when we get into like the 3 and the 4 area, those are kind of like on-deck things that we might play with in 5 or 6 years when we finally get around to it, but we're really focused on zone 1 and zone 5.
Great. And so just to clarify again with this, so anything that's in blue means I do enjoy it or I do have skills. Anything that's in red means I do not enjoy it or I do not have skill or it's not regenerative for me.
Great clarification. Yeah, absolutely. So blue means that we do indeed have that as an enjoyment, a skill, or we find it's regenerative, and red means that we do not. Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Thanks for that, Karin.
Thank you.
So let's say community activism, for example, and generating and connecting with people. Do we enjoy it? Yes, we do. Do we have a lot of skill in it? Yes, we do. Do we find it totally regenerative? Yes, we do. Then that's something we should start be doing and working with. So for an example here, Lila Darwish, who wrote Earth Repair through interviewing the major components of Earth Repair all around the world, and is now actively leading workshops in it. And she also works with community activism and has been a big proponent of the success of a lot of the activism on the west coast of Canada right now, with all of the blockades and the pipelines, and Burnaby Mountain most recently. She was one of the very early testers. She was one of my early guinea pigs with this process a couple years back before she wrote Earth Repair, and we went through this process. We went through this zone 1 to 5, and she found that mapping was out here and community activism was here. Well, what was so interesting is she had this thing where she thought she really should be a good mapper, and I got to tell you, even I have some skill in mapping, to be sure, but I'm not an amazing mapper by any stretch of the imagination, and definitely graphically so. I actually send my rough copies to somebody else, and they render them and they send them back to me, because I would rather guild with somebody who's amazing like that than take up 1 unit of resource, put it into computer-generated rendering of map making, and only get a tenth back. Whereas if I work at this with you folks, or if I work in generating designs and sketches and send a picture to my map maker, he sends them back and he makes them look beautiful and makes me look beautiful, that's fantastic. So same thing with Lila. She was saying, I really don't like map making. So we had this great conversation where I said, well, don't map make anymore. And she goes, well, doesn't that mean I'm not a permaculturalist? She had this sort of air about it. And I said, no, absolutely not. And she's gone on. It's interesting now that she's done this other work. She's gone on to really see, there's a great appreciation for map making. So it's also about kind of putting aside limiting beliefs. And I don't know if Karen's going to be touching upon that in the cohort, but it looks like she's nodding, so I would say yes, she is. But this is also a great assessing tool to see where our limiting beliefs exist, because as we move from 2 to 5, we can really use it as well as a great indication tool. We can use it as a litmus test to say, okay, so where are our limiting beliefs? Where do those things exist, and how can I address them? And that's, of course, that's a whole other piece and a whole other aspect about how we do it and why we do it. So jumping back here again, I just wanted to jump back into the idea that we can have these interests, we can have these ideas, these aspects, and we can sort them. And the 3 questions we're asking is, once we get an interest, do I enjoy it? Do I have skill in it? And do I find it regenerative? Because it gives us a place to start our search for one of our many niches. So the big idea here is to generate these lists, of our skills, our attributes, our traits, our interests, and then the local world problems we see. And I'll explain why those are so important. So within zones of skills, attributes, and traits, there's a lot of ways to do this. And I have my own expanded version, and I'm sure Karen has hers as well, and we also have our own. But there are a few questions we can ask ourselves as we are going throughout this question of asking, what are my skills, what are my attributes, and what are my traits? And I don't care how you arrive at your list. If it's astrology, if it's zodiac, if it's listening to what your parents told and had stories about you as you were a kid, I think that's probably one of the most accurate. If you think back to when you were at Thanksgiving and Christmas, what did your extended family say about you when you were younger? I find that's a very attuned moment, because they like you, they care for you, but they're also sort of this unbiased third party that just go, oh, Javin's a big ham. He's a ham. He's a bit of an artist. He's kind of introverted. And to know it on the screen and to see me present, you'd be like, oh, he's an extrovert. No, not at all. I'm a big introvert. I love being by myself for many stretches. That's how I get my energy. But I like performing. I'm a performing introvert. I've never read anything on it. I just know that's what I am. I like performing. I like singing. I like dancing. I like giving this all to you folks. And then I like to say bye. It's been lots of fun. I'm not the guy who continually connects. That's not what I do. But that's a trait. That is a trait and an attribute of me, which means that as opportunity comes into my holistic context, and this goes back to the holistic management decision-making framework, which I highly recommend people work with. It's such a high-resolution tool. I can balance that. I can say, does that work for who I am as an attribute? And one of my attributes is, I'm a performing introvert. We were recently approached by a production company to do a permaculture, your backyard makeover TV show. It kind of works with my personality to perform solidly for a little bit and then to not. As long as I don't have to do like tours and stuff, I don't know where it's going to go. There's so many opportunities out there, but it works with who I am. It works with my holistic context. And so part of this is through Karin described the process to me that sounds like it's going to generate a lot of that. Understand what your holistic context is. Understand how you operate and create the situation. So how do we do this? So one idea is to think about back or ask your extended family. Don't ask your parents just yet. Kind of use your aunts and uncles first and your grandparents and other kids and say, what do you remember about me when I was a kid? And then move to your parents. They're a little bit too close to home. The second piece is to do what's called an inquiry dyad, which means wrangle your spouse or wrangle somebody else who holds your dreams precious. Now, not everybody holds our dreams precious. We can give our dreams to many people, and sometimes they're like, that was lame. Don't tell me about that. We don't talk to those people about this. We need people who will cultivate our dreams and our thoughts. That's a whole other process as well about how to pick those people. But use your best guess, use your best intuition, and find those people who will hold your dreams precious, and then ask them, bait them with lunch, trade some beer, wine, whatever you drink, but have an energy exchange and say, listen, I really want to work with you. And what I want you to do is sit down with me for 15 minutes via Skype, via one-on-one. A dyad is basically facing each other, uncrossed arms, uncrossed legs, knees to knees, close enough, as long as your personal situation allows. And ask this question. They are only allowed to ask this one question, and they're note-taking. And the only thing they're able to say is this question and to thank you for what you have to say. That's it. That's all they can say. And what they're asking you is, what are your skills, what are your attributes, and what are your traits? And you get to sit there stumped, and you get to go, oh, I don't know. And for those people who think that I don't know is, again, like failure, one of these things we need to be afraid of, I don't know is your body's way of saying, I haven't thought about that yet, give me a second. And feel free to replace I don't know with, I haven't thought about that, give me a second to think about it. Because that also starts to change the programming language within ourselves. I don't know about that. I'll have to think about that for a second. And when we do that, we start to produce an incredible amount of information. I've delivered this program usually within a 2.5 hour time block with PDC students, and basically we sit there and having two students dialogue with each other when mostly there's just been this talking head at them, and they're like, I don't know, and there's something magical that happens at that 5-minute mark when you've been saying I don't know for 5 minutes, and they start going, well, I think I'm pretty good at this, and I'm pretty good at that. And I kind of have this weird quirk where I work really well late at night. I'm kind of a night owl that way, and I got that way in university, but I never really got back to it because I got a 9-to-5 job. Well, that's zone one, just being like, I'd really like you to listen to me, because if you put an hour of work into me in the evening, you're going to get 10 units back. If you put an hour of work into me in the morning, you're going to be sucking energy out of you. A colleague of mine. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, I wanted to ask, how do you differentiate between attributes and traits? Do you have a...
Yeah, great. So the question is, how do we differentiate between attributes and traits? It's a good question. Two ways of looking at this. One way is, and I find this a lot with German students. It's happened to me many times. I'll give like a continuum of things, and the German students will say, how do you delineate? How do you put one in one and one in the other? And then I'll have other students who are like, skills just doesn't quite encompass everything I want to put in there. So two answers to this. One is attributes and traits are a way for us to be a bit more inclusive, and not only to include hard skills like I can speak, I can talk on the fly, but also to add an attribute like I'm a performing introvert, and then a trait like I really like being in front of camera, I really like operating within the situation. So you could kind of talk about an attribute as something that is inherent within oneself. It's something that is core to the zone 0. It's core to how we operate and what we do. A trait is more how we express ourselves, or the way we express ourselves. Written communication for me, and Karin has been subject to this. I go into a really weird place when I write, and I write as if I'm a bit of a robot, and it's like my emails. People have told me for a long time I don't come across with a lot of emotion in my writing, which is something instead of trying to build all this emotion in my writing, I just don't really write. I do videos because I can do a video quickly, and I'm a pretty expressive guy when I do a video. I don't need to do that. So if that helps, you can think of a skill as a hard thing I know how to do. I can type. An attribute would be I really enjoy typing, and I enjoy typing in such a way that I enjoy typing at night. And then trait would be the way I type. So I really like to type in a certain aspect or a certain way, or with a certain type of tool, or sort of how we offer that skill or that aspect. Does that help, Karin?
That does. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. And again, for everyone else who's like, oh, I don't really like those differentiations, it's like, great, make up your own. But basically, this is to include all that specialness that is you into the system. Gotcha. So however you generate that, however you put that into play, however you sort all those pieces out, or generate those pieces, then go for it. But basically, the generation is up to you, and you can use some of these tools I've given you. The harvesting is basically making sure that those are documented, put together, and you have them documented. And so, in the dyad, that's having your partner write them down, because you are in generation mode, you're not in documentation mode. And then the sorting is asking yourself those 3 questions. And the way I do this is I have a full list of all the things we've generated. So it's your raw or your gross list, gross and net. And so gross is what we have totally coming in. Net is the sorted filter or the expenses. We have this list, and we ask the question, do we enjoy this? And we just put a little E beside it. And then we go down, and we just go E, 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 no, E, E, E. And we ask, do I have skill in this? Do I have some sort of competency in this? And we go S, 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 S. And then we go down again, and we ask this question, which is, when I do this, and this takes some time and some thought. And when I was doing the online training of this program last year, I had folks say, this is a lot of work. No, you don't say. Designing your life is a lot of work? That's shocking. And so I'll tell you, and I've got a slide about this. This takes work. This takes time. This takes energy. We've been domesticated humans for a long time. It takes a lot of work to break out of that, and then it takes a lot of work to do this work. So all I can say is take the time, dedicate the time, turn off the phones, turn off the notifications, tell the kids they need to take a hike for a little bit, and the spouses and all the rest of it, and the friends, and just say, I'm going to dedicate myself to this for an hour and a half. That's how success happens. A good friend of mine who are artists, and good friends of mine who are technicians, especially self-employed, they block time. This is my creative time. This is my generation time. But take the time to do this. This is how we become successful. Create this process, filter this process, and when folks say, great, so this is static, right? I'm done this? No. Life design doesn't get to stop, not until you're in the ground. You continually work at this every single day. So, my zones of skills, attributes, and traits, I have an organic document that constantly gets updated. And I create time for it every month. I go back to this once it's been created, and I go through it again. I say, okay, what's missing? What did I learn about myself this month? And let's be honest, we invest into our houses, our cars, but we don't invest into ourselves. And it's the most important thing we can do, is to read, to make friends with the imminent dead, and to really connect with who and how we operate. So hopefully that little moment helped you folks give a little bit push in the right direction. As an educator in high school once told me, a kick in the ass is still a step in the right direction. So with that, I'll mosey on to friends of mine, Rob and Michelle Avis of Verge Permaculture. Rob runs just a brilliant PDC. It's really a business-focused PDC for designers who are creating design consultancies. And great PDC, huge amount of value you get for the price point. And Rob's an engineer by trade. He likes being an engineer. He's an engineer through and through. When you're taught by him, you're like, I'm being taught by an engineer. He teaches in Calgary, which if folks know of Montana and Texas, sometimes I feel like Alberta was a one-night stand between Montana and Texas, like bigger, better buck and lone, rugged mountain man. And then Calgary is like a distillation of that. So high corporate culture, go, 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 bigger, better buck, lots of professionalism, and that's what Rob delivers. You know, we've all been into permaculture courses that maybe were a little bit more on the I don't want to say unprofessional, but maybe a little bit more on the wishy-washy, whatever. But a consummate professional. So what am I getting at? What am I driving at? Rob runs a very professional PDC. He runs it like an engineer would. And he had a huge amount of people who were coming through his PDC and loving it. He had a few people who didn't, and they left, which is great, because all of this is about sorting out our clientele, and I'll get to that in a second. But what he found is, as he started to offer facilitation techniques and reflection techniques and harvesting techniques, things that, you know, Karin and I in our line of work, we do quite a lot, people really started to say, what are you doing? This isn't the PDC I signed up for. I signed up for a professional, you know, technically focused PDC. And so what's so interesting about him is that he realized that his attribute, one of his greatest zones of brilliance, was who he was, and people loved that about him. So he retooled a couple of years back, and he went back to his format, intensified the technical aspect, and really drove that home. And he just becomes more and more and more and more loved for what he does, which is a great example here. And you know, the slide isn't here, but it's coming up. But your perspective is the most unique asset you have. It is the most unique and valuable asset you have. Your perspective, how you view the world, most unique aspect. I love doing this work with people. I love playing with and working with people and how they want to be and act and be in this world. It's something I love. Not everybody does. I love helping people show up with value. I love helping people understand this. I'm not a photovoltaic installer. I'm not. I tried it out. I'm not that guy. And I don't want to be that guy, because that guy takes a lot of energy. So Rob and Michelle are a great example of you know, how to create this. If you want to visit them, that's vergepermaculture.com. Rob and Michelle Avis. So let's go back to it. Zones of interest. So as we go through our permaculture buffet or life, you know, I've got a friend of mine who now uses this model in her university for her students. And I've been approached by other universities, University of Michigan, to help them with their career design program. How do we do this? So you could take any interest, and in the orthodox permaculture, you know, we have the 14 pieces. We have state of the world, concepts and themes, methods of design, patterns of understanding. But you could break out each of these. And so in a 6-week permaculture intensive that I worked with over at Salt Spring Island, every day we'd review this with the students. We would say, okay, so let's talk about trees. What did we learn about trees today? And they would pull it out. They pull out all the different interests of trees. Trees, perennials, perennial trees that are nitrogen fixing, pruning, cuttings, propagation. You really need to pull this out. And so again, this could be a process that you do with other people, or again in your diet, especially with other people who are permaculture. But pull out these pieces and really get a sense of the landscape. This is getting a sense of the map of permaculture. And again, what we'll do is we'll go back to the zones of interest, and we'll take something, just like we were talking about with Lila. Take mapping, for example. And where does mapping fit for me? Or if you're doing this not with permaculture, if you're doing this with your life, just take your interests. Karin asked me when we were talking about this, she said, you know, how does this help people get down to really what they want? And that's this process. This is a filtering mechanism. This is a sieve. And we drop all of our thoughts and our ideas at the top, or the bottom, and it filters up or filters down, all depending on what direction you want to think of it here. And things land in different zones. And so, yeah, a lot of people, and I totally see this now, that it does say 1, 2, 2, 4, 5. So anyways, for anybody who's just jumping on here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And yeah, kind of interesting. But all these different pieces are what we need to focus on. And really the biggest things to focus on are zone 1. What are the things that we enjoy, we have skill and regenerative in? Zone 5, so we avoid them. And then zone 4, I'll talk about zone 4 now, just because it's a good time to do it. I call this in case of emergency break glass, or when necessary. So I have a skill, I can do resume editing, writing, and refinement. It's a skill I garnered in university. I can do it really well. I can't say I like it, but I can do it. Which means I have a skill that I can break in need of emergency. I can produce income for myself on my road to my business if necessary. I can also drywall. If you ask me the #1 smell I hate in this world, it would be drywall dust. That is the #1 smell I dislike. I've worked with human manure, I've worked with septic gray water systems, which is very gross, I will tell you this now. But drywall dust is the one thing I never want to smell again in my life. Which means that it's a zone 4. I have competence in it. I can do it, but I don't like it. So why do we do this whole process? Again, come back to the basics. It's to get a sense of what your inventory is. What are all the pieces you have in your life so you can see them laid out and you can go, okay, I can see that these make sense. And when we put these things together, it's amazing how quickly niches form, and especially when you work with somebody else, they can really see it quicker than you can. Because we're far too close to it. So again, go through the process of generating what are all the interests and what are all the skills or attributes or aspects of you or your interest in your work, and that could be in permaculture, outside of permaculture. It doesn't have to be confined to permaculture. Say you're interested in holistic management. Well, all depending on who you talk to, that's involved in permaculture or that's not involved in permaculture. The big thing here is just to really itemize and get a sense of, okay, what are all the pieces I'm looking at? And one way to do that is to go through the orthodox permaculture curriculum, go through and get a sense of all these different pieces. You know, for example, I love design, I love patterns, I love climate, I love trees, I love water, I love soil. I love all of these things, but what are the things that I'm really good at? What are the things I really have competency in and I enjoy? I love doing broad-scale design. I love working in the dryland climates. You know, I was in Kenya last year working in drylands, and I loved it. It was a lot of fun. Strategies for an alternative nation, that's somebody else's bag. That's somebody else to work with. It's just not what I do or do well, and so I respect it and I guild, just like in permaculture, we guild with other people, we guild with people. And I'd argue that probably the folks in your cohort, or for anybody else who's viewing, you know, there are people around you that could really support you. And as an example, my good friend and also my graphic artist, Christopher Heffley, we were talking a couple of years back, and we started talking about a permaculture T-shirt company. We started talking about you know, what would that look like, and so he created a very clever name called Permaculture. I created a little business out of it, made a bunch of different shirts. I've worn this one and a few others on many occasions, and created a great little business out of it. Just a super business because that was his interest. He's a graphic designer through and through, and he realized that after 2 PDCs and going to Cuba and you know, doing all these trips, he does that design for himself. It's not something he's really interested in doing for other people. So how we express our design and how we express what we do, that's really important as well. Okay, let's jump into local world problems. Unless, Karen, you had any questions about what we just ran through?
Yes, I wanted just to clarify, you've taken us through a couple different lenses, and one of them just now was looking at the permaculture curriculum. Mm-hmm. And I know that this is the third one, the Zones of Local World Problems. What were they again, just so I can keep the framework straight in my head?
Sure. So there's 3 specifically, and you know, we'll pop through this so we can just go back to it. So we've got skills, attributes, and traits. So that's one of these filtering sieves we're gonna run our interests through. There's the interests sieve as well, so we're going to filter through our interests and have them come out as well. And then local world problems. So this is the triumvirate of these 3 different filters we're going to come down to.
Great. That helps a lot to see the visual. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anything else?
No, I'm thinking about the process that I'm taking my students from, and one of the processes that I've had them do is honoring what's present. And so that's where they are writing down all the skills that they have, that they've developed through any part of their life. Experiences, attributes, and traits go in there wonderfully. And so it will be great on next Tuesday to take them through and do the exercise, you know, the E, the S, and the R, and have them put that on their list. And we can also add in the interest part. I can see how that would make sense. So that's great. And we were talking yesterday on our call about what are unfilled niches in permaculture and brainstorming some of those things. So I think that fits nicely with the local world problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And that generation moment, that brainstorm between a bunch of people is great, because more often than not, what people generate isn't for themselves, it's for somebody else in the cohort. And that's why it's so important to have everybody involved, because they're going to think of something new or put something into play. They're going to see how it filters out.
Yeah, it was so wonderful to see how the big mind when we put our minds together as one, as the Haudenosaunee region, what's possible.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Well, shall we continue on into
Yes,
local
please.
world problems?
That's great.
Okay, awesome. So we'll just zoom forward here again. And yeah, we'll jump to local world problems. Okay, so local world problems. Why would I bring this up? Why would I talk about this? Isn't permaculture about solutions? Isn't it about helping people out? Well, yes, and sometimes the focus on solutions creates the yellow dog syndrome, where we come up to somebody who's like, I can solve that. I can help. I can put in a swale. I can do some rainwater, and they're like, what? Like, you can do that, but you're not solving my problem. Or I was recently introduced to an interesting program called the Foundation, which is a software development entrepreneurship program, and the founder's big thrust is solve an industry's problem, solve the problem that's there. And his process is to go up to industry and to ask a multitude of practitioners, what are the problems that you are currently facing? What are the problems that you're currently facing, and what is it worth to you to solve that problem? And your first response for people is going to be like, oh well, I need to manage my clients better, and that would be worth $500. And you're like, okay, but what's that really worth to you? Well, I might pay $100 a month for it. Well, this is his process to create really highly successful businesses in a short order of time that generate income. And the businesses that I've seen that have been successful, the ones where I haven't had to put in a lot of effort, are businesses that solve people's problems. There's Ben Jones, the entrepreneur guru down in the States. This is his big thing. He only works with people in their 30s because he feels like that's a filtering process for people to get to that place in awareness. And anybody who's watching this is under 30. Don't think you don't have the ability. It's just his own filtering process. Who have solved their own problem, and that's really where your wound is your greatest strength. Can also create your clientele very quickly.
Right.
So I found a great place here because my big wound was this depression that really kept me from getting into what I really loved. And there's this old joke, who do you ask for directions? Well, the guy with one leg, because he doesn't want to go there twice. So you need to source the right information from the right people. So a lot of people come into my program because I've made multiple businesses. I failed at some, I've succeeded in others. But my big thrust is life design. I really want to live a great life and have a great time because I spent so many years being so miserable and really it's just a horrible place to be. So, who are you going to for information? And so in the same place when we get onto this local world problems, who are you asking? And what are the questions you're asking? And what's going on? This idea that, and I'm not saying farmers don't appreciate permaculture, but this idea of marketing permaculture to farmers has been pretty well debunked. You take folks with some of the lowest potential earning income and ask them to spend money on training, which they could probably get for free because they're DIY people anyways. That doesn't make a lot of sense. My clientele are these folks. No, they aren't. It's really important to see those pieces. So, the question here to ask is, as we get down to local world problems, is what are the local world problems that you see that grit your teeth, that keep you up at night? What are those problems? What are those problems that you see that keep you up at night that really frustrate you? That are the things that make you go, ugh. A woman in the previous class, the online class I ran as a training, she said, I hate that at any moment, she's on the west coast of North America, I hate it at any moment there could be a huge amount of disruption, of disaster. People won't know how to take care of themselves or to operate. And her big thing is disaster preparedness. That's her big thrust. That's a local world problem that she sees. I see a local world problem that there's all these permaculturists and people in general who aren't focused and aren't integrating all of their permaculture and all of their life skills and all of their applications and all of their local world problems into who they are. And they're trying to be Jeff Lawton. They're trying to be Steph Holzer. They're trying to be Marisha Arbuck. They're trying to be Penny Livingston. They're trying to be Vandana Shiva. Don't be those people. That is such a waste of your potential and who you are. If you live a copy, You know, you were born with a vision. Don't die a copy of somebody else. Really explore this. So a big part of that is what are the local world problems that you see? What are the things that you get your teeth? How do we dive into this besides just asking a question? Okay, so one of the ways is go through your Facebook feed. If you're a Facebooker, if you're a social media, and see what you're posting. That's one way to do it. Go through, what have I posted over the last year or last year? What are the trends? What are the trends of what I'm always really angsty about? Another question is to ask your immediate circle of friends, your immediate family, what is the subject matter that they are most worried you will get onto, and it will be a leg trap that they will never be able to get out from? What are the things that you talk your ear off about them, or you visit your self-righteousness upon them? I was a bit of a recycling vehement supporter for many years, still am. It's something that I see, which means reusing, recycling, upcycling, all those things I love. Those are things that really get me going. My family really helped me out and showed me that those are the things that are my local world problems. So it's one of those ways to turn our self-righteousness around and actually create something beautiful out of it, create something that's actually quite gorgeous out of it. And then again, run it through the sieve process. So recycling, I enjoy it, I have skill in it, I find it regenerative. Awesome. Another local world problem I see, people unput together or unable to activate. I enjoy it, I have skill in it, I have regenerative in it. I could be even more specific, and here's the $2,000 secret about this process. The more specific you can be, the more useful this is. So when we land design now, we're finally at a place in permaculture and also in regenerative land care and the agrarian platform, and if you're into land design, there's all these platforms now. We're finally at the place where metrics, baseline metrics, is one of the most important things we can have. This is baseline metrics for you. This is baseline metrics to understand where you are and what you're doing. This is taking soil samples, this is taking tissue samples of yourself and knowing where and what you do, right? Colleague and friend who's a soil scientist and evolutionary biologist, her big piece about this was, always have baseline data, always have baseline data. She came through the process as well, and now with this baseline data, she's really focused on what she's doing. It's beautiful and brilliant to see.
You're saying our inventory, once we go through the filtering process, becomes our baseline data for ourselves. That is then evolving.
You got it. As of December 17th or as of December, right? And that's why it's baseline data, because all along this process, we go back, we revisit. So if you haven't created a routine or a culture of checking in with yourself in a structured way, then what you're doing is just anecdotal life design, which for some people, and I used to live on the west coast of Canada, and for some people when I told them this, that sort of ephemeral spirit was like, you can't tell me what to put down, you can't tell me the baseline data, that totally crushes my spirit. I'm like, well then don't do it. This is the great thing about all of this. This is buyer beware, this is test this out to see if this works for you. If this isn't the tool for you, find another tool. I'm not saying this is the end all be it all, but Karin, you're absolutely correct. This is baseline data, an inventory of baseline data that is a snapshot in time. It's not your forever.
Great.
Yeah. Any other questions about that?
Nope, that seems good.
Okay. So local world problems. What are your local world problems? What do you see? What do you clip out? Another way to take a look at it is, especially if you're doing a surf on Facebook, or you're just doing a surf on Reddit or any of those websites that are aggregators, what are you constantly opening up, and what are the multitude of browsers? What is the theme? If we are permaculture designers, we're always looking for the pattern. We're looking for what is the emergence that's coming. Mm-hmm. Right? We don't do permaculture, we arrive at permaculture. This is arriving at your own personal inner landscape permaculture. Mm-hmm. So that aspect of, zones of brilliance, of, your zones of skills, attributes, and traits, your zones of interest, and your zones of local world problems, they come together in this triumvirate. And this is that cartoon I was talking about. Your perspective is unique and your biggest asset. And how we look at the world is a very specific filter. Jeff Lawton talks about this. He says, when you walk out in the world, if you walk out with emotion, you have a screen up, and you'll only see things that are outside of your emotion. So part of it is training yourself to understand what your perspective is, and maybe you know, if it's negative, you can do a bit of changing, but really use it, right? This is a very unique way of looking at things. Good friend of mine, Tad Hargraves, who runs marketingforhippies.com, cannot recommend his work enough for folks who are looking at the marketing aspect of once they get what their niche is. Marketingforhippies.com. He's big on this as well. It's like who you are and how you operate. That's the most important thing that we can have for each other. So what this ends up happening, this is, this is paint by number, color your own piece here. So we can put interests in one, we can put skills attributes, and we can put local world problems. And what ends up here in the zone 1, this portion is what we want to focus on. This is where we want to get to. Because writing it down, and this is true for holistic management decision-making framework, most of our thoughts and our goals are unclarified, unwritten, and undefined. And so we write them down to be clear, defined, conscious, and expounded. And this, we write to discover what we know and who we are. So when we go back to this, this paint by numbers piece, and you can use this as a model. There's other models that I've developed, but this is a model I'm experimenting with right now. So basically, you would have your zone 5 here, your 4, your 3, your 2, and your 1, the big portion of, whoa, we just went all over the place here. You have all these pieces here. This then becomes the next piece of this design process, and this is the piece that's really exciting when you get all of your zone 1s together, because then you get all of your regenerative aspects all put together. This is where it gets a lot of fun. So you have your zone 1s of interest, your zone 1s of skills, attributes, and traits, and your zone 1s of local world problems. And if you've sorted them, and if you've been very fastidious, you've been very lean on cutting things out, being like, do I really like this? Is this really regenerative? You have to be hard on yourself. Nobody else is going to do it for you. You have to really be focused on pruning and really taking the shaft from the wheat, right? Permaculture and the plant kingdom, we talk about biomimicry, it gives us all the analogies we need to do what we need to do. We need to really separate out to get the kernels of truth. So once we have all these pieces, there's a few ways to go about this, and in my time left, I'll tell you about a couple. One of them is to sit with it, to go through whatever your meditation process is. If it's just going for a walk, going out to what I call church, going for a walk in my local biome, and just going out with a free mind and coming back and taking a look at this and saying, what are the connections I see? And starting to circle where you can see connections and iterate what those connections are. If you work in land design, if you've gone through your PDC, this is bubble map diagramming. That's what this is. This is bubble map diagramming. We're creating these little bubble maps. We're trying to see where these pieces are. And then, pull those pieces out, put them to the side and say, okay, so if it is community activism and I really have an interest in a skill in writing, and I have another local world problem of regeneration and earth repair, I'm of course talking about Lila Darwish, here's this interesting triumvirate that I really feel excited about. And then it's that personal response. Do I like this idea? Does this feel good? Another business advisor of mine, and I'm sure Karin will talk about it, but when we create businesses, to reach out to other business owners and members and mentors and say, would you be part of my business advisor group? Would you help to mentor me? And you state your terms and you say, I'll only contact you maybe once every 6 months. And that's been sort of my case. I reach out to these folks when I can. And I said, with these businesses, what should I do? And some of the best advice on being an entrepreneur I ever was given was, if you can't wake up every day and be super passionate about it, don't do it. Because it's your life's work, or it's a continuum. It's the steps of your life work. And that first business, that first step, if you're this small, if you're this high, right, you're this tall, and like this is the step, you can't see step 4, but you can see step 1. So it's like getting onto that first business and saying, okay, that's really interesting. I wonder what's going to happen next. Oh, I can see more as we walk up these steps. Mm-hmm. That's what this niche function is. And similarly, I heard that Pixar went through a really interesting process to create their first 8 films, where they all sat down in a coffee shop and they just said, what are all the interesting ideas we have? And they lined out their first 8 movies. It was all put out, and basically they ran on that for, I think it was 8 or 10 years. Same thing here. What are all the different ideas you want to play with? and then take the business that seems like it will be the most enjoyable and potentially the most lucrative and play with that idea. And so that's a very condensed form of how we do this design process. The other way to do it is give it to somebody else. Give it to somebody else who has knows you, who can hold your dreams precious. Give it to somebody else and have them look at it and go, okay, what are the connections you see? Preferably somebody else who has that permaculture mindset. Preferably somebody else who has that aspect. I've done this consulting with people who've taken the online training and they just want me to take a look at it and see what I see. And I'm sure Karin would be a great resource for that, or friends or family. But go to high grade information sourcing. George Bernard Shaw had this great quote that most people really think once or twice a year, like seriously think about something. Mostly it's autopilot. And he made a great living out of thinking once or twice a week. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about sitting down and thinking about this. So give this over to somebody else, see if they can make these connections. So what happens after this process? So I've made this niche connection. I've zoned into what I might try out. So there's two processes here which we'll iterate quickly. One is to define success. And it's something that I think is important for everyone to do. If you haven't done it yet for your participation in your cohort, ask yourself, what does success mean for me at the end of 6 months? What does it feel like? What does it look like? What have I experienced? What have I not experienced? What am I ready for? Really get a sense of that. And that's what that holistic management decision-making process is for. But similarly, if this would be your niche, like if your niche would be, well, let's pull a bunch of stuff out of thin air. It's kind of like improv. I like working with goats. I like working on people's land. And a local world problem I see is brush, is overgrowing of brush in utility corridors. Well, the connection there could be you run a rent-a-goat business to the local utility company. You test pilot on these different areas, and you get a sense of what that might be. So what does success look like for you? Well, in a year, I want to have at least 3 clients. I'm making at least $500, $600 a month. The goats are local celebrities, which if folks have played with business design before, making your business a mascot or making your conversation a mascot. And for those people who are looking to tell really good stories, I refer you to Ian McKenzie and his Crowdfunding 101 series. If you look up those 2 pieces, you'll get a beautiful, beautiful online 2-hour presentation from Ian McKenzie talking about how to tell your story and tell it well. And he's talking about crowdfunding, so maybe crowdfunding is a part of your business design, but he's amazing about saying you're actually the guide, and the person in the story that you're telling is your ideal demographic, your ideal client. And that's a beautiful way of taking a look at storytelling. So get a sense of what success looks like, tangibly, physically. I really like using what's called the 8 Forms of Capital by Ethan Rowland and Gregory Landua, Regenerative Enterprise. It's a great inventory system. I use it with clients all the time. So you could take a look at that and say, okay, so what does it look fiscally? What does it look like in my living capital, my social capital, my cultural capital, my spiritual capital, my material, experiential, intellectual? Those are the 8 forms of capital, because the triple bottom line isn't enough anymore. And then get a sense of what that looks like. And then here's where another permaculture design comes into play. Another permaculture design tool, backcasting. And this is a great tool. If this is success, what happens the day before success? What happens the week before? What happens the month before? What happens the quarter before? What happens 6 months? What happens a year before? And so I did this process with a student in 6-week PDC. And her big idea was she wanted to have a working farm that had examples of her landscape design business, had propagation, and was running workshops. And we designed her entire business. This was great. We designed her entire business in an hour. The whole business was designed in an hour. And this is the big focus on business models versus business plans. Business plans are static. Business models are malleable, and they work with you. So we went through this whole process. We said, what do you have to do? And we went from patterns to details. We said, what do you have to do a quarter before, a quarter before, a quarter before, a quarter before? What do you have to do a month before? What do you have to do a week before? What do you have to do a day before? We got to like 10 days before her success point. And truth be told, 8 months after she finished that course, and she started the day after the course, her farm was done. She had everything in place. She was focused, laser. she put out what you wanted to the world. You know, if you believe in the secret, or you just believe in the fact that you tell people what you want and they help you out with it, and that's actually a bit more tangible than saying there's cosmic forces. You know, if that turns you off, I'm Albertan. You know, that doesn't always work for me, so I have to be a bit more practical. You know, out on the coast, I'm a hippie, or pardon me, out on the coast, I'm a redneck. In Alberta, I'm the hippie. I'm a man without a province now, or a state, if you want to use the nomenclature of Americans. But what's so interesting about that is she had it. And another business, Edible Earth and Designs, landscaping company I helped mentor, they're into their business now. And it's really about using these really specific formats to get people to where they're going, if they work for you. I'm not saying that this works for everybody. And to make that claim, I think if anybody makes that claim, you need to be aware that they're a little bit silver bullet mentality-ish, and they're probably not in the biodiversity that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. So what are these systems? We have our sieve system, which is attributes, skills, traits, interests, and local world problems. We ask if it is enjoyable, we ask if we have skill in it, we ask if it's regenerative. We sort those pieces out. We generate those on the outset, we sort those pieces out that come into the middle. Once those pieces are in the middle, then what we do is we get a chance to pass that off to somebody else, or to take a look at it ourselves with fresh eyes. How do we look at things with fresh eyes? I don't teach meditation. The only thing I do is I try to count to 100 internally in my head, deep breathing. If I screw up, if I forget, if I start entertaining a thought, I go back to 0. That's how I clear my mind. I'm not saying I'm amazing at any of this. I'm just saying this is what's worked for me. I get to 100, and then I work on a project, or I walk into a piece of land. That's how I set my observation lens. That's how I put my permaculture goggles on, right? And once my permaculture goggles are on for my life, then I take a look at this process. If you take a bath, if you listen to heavy metal music, as my design collaborator does, nicest guy in the world, loves heavy metal rock where you can't even hear what they're saying. That's what he listens to. That's how he gets into his space. Whatever your muse is, however you get there, that's how you get there. Take a look at that piece. See if you can see connections. Bubble map diagram. What are the connections here? How do I see these things? And then have an evaluatory process. How do I feel about this? Does this make me excited? If it doesn't make you excited, mark an X through it. That's not for you. If you get through this whole process and all you see is X's, that's a very interesting situation. And that comes into probably the generation process. So if you find that there's not something there, that can be a feedback piece.
So you froze up briefly right after you said the bubble map diagram, just so you...
Okay, great. So now that we are unfrozen, the bubble map diagram, once we get those pieces together, take that and have a personal connection with it. Yeah, is this enjoyable? Is this something I could wake up and do for a year, for 2 years? You know, when I started the microgreens business, I looked at it and I said, I could do that for a year. I only did it for 6 months, so I already had a good understanding. But when I ran it through a matrix to see if it was regenerative, generative, or degenerative, the best case scenario was we lost money and we learned a ton about production-based businesses, because that's a whole different business, right? I was in service business before that. I was in education before that. I was in construction before that. But this was the first time I produced something, food, and I sold it to other people, and we had this exchange. So that's a way to get those niches piece. And then once you have that idea about what that might be, and you're super excited about it, and that's the green light. If you're not excited about it, don't do it. Futurecast, do this backcasting piece. What does success look like for you in the outset? You know, what does it look like to you? How does it operate? And then really get a sense about, you know, is this what I want to be doing? Is this where I want to be? And how am I going to operate with this? And I'm going to put up sort of the bigger process that I work with people, just to give folks a sense about where I'm headed here. So we can see here, you know, the motivation is really what and how you do. The destination is the holistic management piece. This right here is what we're talking about. This is the niche piece. The design piece is taking those pieces, putting them together. You have to define your success, backcast what are we doing from patterns to details at, you know, large increments of time, and then we get into something called high-grade info. Mm-hmm. So I worked with a great mentor who said, we can do anything in the world if you have high-grade information, you have a high intent, and you have an incredible amount of focus. So let's say you want to go into restoration agriculture. You love Mark Shepard's model. you love what he does, you love how he operates, don't go to a facsimile of Mark. Go to Mark.
Mm-hmm.
If you want barroom advice, pay barroom prices. If you want high-grade information, pay high-grade prices. When I created the microgreens business, I went over to Vancouver. I went over to the Food Peddlers, which is one of the first microgreens businesses in Canada. And Chris Thoreau, I paid him $1,500, and he gave me exact instructions. He gave me spreadsheets. He gave me operational capacities. Pay for high-grade information. If you want high-grade information, pay for high-grade information. You can't stress that enough. That's money well spent every single time. And then we can go into what's called classic business design or classic modeling. And I say classic just because they're, again, stand on the shoulders of giants. Permaculturists, we have a few new traits, a few new ways of looking at it, but business modeling, it's pretty good. So unless you have something better, use that. And at that point, it's just getting out and hitting the road and really doing it and putting it all together. And there's processes for that. I'm sure Karin's going to talk about that. That's why you guys are in this 6-month process. But I'll leave you with a bit of advice from some mentors from mine that have really helped me to understand how to operate and design well. I spent some time working and learning from Sepp Holzer, both in North America and in Austria. And he has this great idea, be the pig. If you're going to experience your model, be your model, and to experience it playfully. That's the Holzerian design methodology. And I love that. That was never in permaculture for me, but for Sepp, it's like once you create your niche, play with it. And my buddy Ted Hargrave would say, don't marry your niche, date your niche, court it, test it out a bit, try it a bit, take it on a couple of first dates, see how it feels. If your niche talks horribly to the waiter, don't go for a second date with your niche. If your niche doesn't make you super happy and you don't walk away being like, that was a lot of fun, you need to let that niche go. There are other niches in the sea. Let that go. That's not for you right now. Because this process of going what we think is a straight line is actually a pretty circuitous route. It takes us in a multitude of different ways. And so I'll leave you before I open up for a few questions from Karin, or if anybody's emailed Karin with questions, I'll just open it up with, this is my mantra for life. I've got a few, but this is my favorite, which is to wake up, kick ass, and repeat on a daily basis. And this works for me because a kick in the pants is a step in the right direction. So if folks do want to know more about my work, it's permaculturebc.com. If folks want to take a look at some of the trainings or other things that come up that could be complementary to what Karin's doing, that'd be great. Or if folks just want to touch base and let me know how people felt about this process, I'd love to hear feedback. I love developing this. I'm going to be at Permaculture Voices 2 this year in March. I'm going to be giving this expanded program. I'm also going to be offering a much larger training program, and I also do one-on-one consulting. I don't know what it is about the New Year's, but the resolution people for life design are coming out of the woodwork, and it was really hard for me actually to schedule a call with Karin because I've been on the phone pretty much nonstop for the last week setting people up with cultivated life design. So I really appreciate, Karin, for you to take the time to make all this work. It's beautiful and brilliant to be able to work with people like yourself who are making these great programs to help a cohort that you obviously like working with, your niche people, my people, women who are interested in business and putting them together. I really want to applaud you. Seeing more women in this work and being able to support them is just such a privilege for me. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Javin. Thanks. This has been wonderful to see how you lay out the niching. It's so complementary to the process that I'm taking the women through. And a couple things that came up for me as you were speaking especially about action. One of the things that I learned in my coaching program that I'm going to definitely emphasize for the women is we're going to do all this niching work, and then I'm going to get them to action. Because I really do believe that alchemy is in the action. So getting out there and, talking to mentors, getting the best information possible, that type of thing. Not actually thinking about it, overthinking, doesn't really get you to action.
Yeah.
So, the great thing about the interviews is that was my aim, to get them some access to the highest grade information they could. And one of the things I was thinking about that this leads into a question is, so for me, you know, my niche, I love training. I love working with people and doing education. I love questioning mental models and creating new paradigms.
Yeah.
I don't love sitting at the computer. Right? You know, so had I done this niche thing, it might have looked different. But what I tell folks is, what's your niche for now? You know, I could very much see myself developing leadership, you know, green entrepreneurship for women retreats that have a lot of body and movement and yoga that would just take this niche to another level. So just wondering, you know, what you think about when you find out, oh, there's something in that niche that I love that, like, oh, I don't love that one part that comes with the territory. So I was wondering if you have anything to say about that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I really do. And for anybody who's watching on the YouTube streaming channel, I just wanted to put out a bit of a commentary. We got some time. If folks want to ask us a question, you can email Karin, or you can email me at javin@permaculturebc.com. I've got my email up right now, so if folks do have a question and they can't get through to Karin or something and they just want to throw it up, we'll be up for, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes. So that's such a great question, you know, the niche for now, right? It's the whole idea. If you can't find Mr. Right, find Mr. Right now. If you can't find my niche, find niche now. You know, niche is really interesting because niche comes from a French word, which is nest, right? What is the nest? And I like thinking about it that way, because as we grow and as we come out of our fledgling self, the niche that brought us to that place is no longer the niche that can hold us, because we have grown. We have physically, mentally, emotionally changed. And I think for me in metaphors, that's how I work. You know, I think and I work in metaphors. That's when I really glom or grok something. It's a term that the West Coasters like to use, grok. Yeah, so that niche. So, you know, if folks are interested, there's another great permaculturist, Ala Gulbert, who runs the Meaningful Work Project, which is, it sounds like you and her would be very complementary. It would be a great connection. But she has a lot of commentary about this, which is, you know, as we come out of that first niche, as we come out of that first commentary about how and what we understand, we need to be aware of those markers, like you're talking about. Like some of the markers are like, I used to love this, but I don't anymore. And there are two things I wanted to talk about. One is that Joseph Campbell thing I started to talk about at the beginning of the call, which was, you know, follow your bliss. And then the other one was like, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And I look at that now and I'm like, bullshit. You both laughed at me. That's not true. And there's more to it. And part of it is there's your biological family and there's your logical family. And how this connects with your question is your biological family was your family of origins. Your logical family is your family of choice. So what you're talking about is sometimes the way we operate within a niche is not the logical family. It's not the logical assemblage. And so sometimes we need to understand what is the logical application of what we do. It might not be with somebody else. It might not be with sitting at the computer. We might need to retool it. And this is a really important piece as well, is to allow it to evolve instead of throwing it out. Especially my generation, you know, when we get from like the 25 to 40 range, we like to throw things out and start again, because we're told that the average, what is it? Just took a look at the stat the other day. 2 years is the average job or career right now, and we switch over. When I started in my career, you know, it said 7 years, you'll have 7 careers. Now it's something up to like 10. And we switch and we switch and we switch. And recently I was given some great advice from a business advisor, which is retool what you do, find how it applies to you best, and that goes back to that niche piece. That goes back to, you know, what are your zones? What are your zones of brilliance? And I would say, you know, for you, Karin, if you came to me with that problem, I would say, great, let's go through that process again. And you would look at me like, I already went through that. I'm like, great, I'll just ask you harder questions, and I'll kind of, you know, put your feet against the fire and say, do you seriously find that regenerative? And you'd look at me and you'd be like, maybe I don't. Maybe this isn't what I want. You know, I had a client student who his 3 was composting and hugelkultur, being an artist, and skateboarding. That was his big thing. you know. And this is great because some people would be like, oh, that's trivial. That's not a person who's actually useful in society. And I highly contest that idea. I think we need to all come with our gifts, where it's all hands on deck. So we looked at it. I said, how do you feel about composting? He's like, oh, that's neat. I was like, no. So for folks who are listening, you go through the sieve process and you're like, oh, that's neat. That's a great sign that that's not a zone 1. It's someplace else. He's like, I love hugelkultur. And for those that don't know what hugelkultur is, it's bearing wood and then having it as a water and nutrient source. Lots of videos on that on my YouTube channel. And then he's like, oh, yeah, artist. I'm like, okay, what kind of artist? And he's like, well, I love sketching. I'm like, what kind of sketching? And he got really quiet. He's like, I love graffiti. He's like, great, you love graffiti. That's great. Let's be specific. And then I said, skateboarding? He's like, that's just who I am. I skateboard. That's what I do. Like, okay, so we kind of talked about it a bit. And we came up with this idea that he would do, well, it was herbs in hugelkultur is what it was. It was like he liked this herbal aspect. And we ended up thinking, okay, well, you could do herb profiles in this wild style graffiti format, and you could speak to your tribe and your people. You could speak to your skateboarders, right? You could create hugelkulturs around your skate park. You could do all these things. You could create a Kickstarter campaign to create a coffee table book, which I would even find interesting. And I'm not part of that tribe. I just love graffiti. It's something I've always really enjoyed. And just to see that in a different way, that really helped me to understand. And so, you know, Karin, for you, it's like, I hate sitting at the computer. It's like, great, well, how do we retool? Well, part of it is going back to that attributes list and even taking now what that zone 1 was that you had before, and then splitting that out and putting that through a 1 to 5 and being even hyper aware, hyper discerning. Judgment is great when we discern and use it surgically because it is a really large tool.
Great, that was a great answer. I don't have any emails from anybody. I don't know
either.
if you do. Okay.
I've got some great response saying thanks so much for the process. Ala was actually on the call, and she's really excited to talk to you, so
Great.
I'll connect you guys. That was great to hear from her. A couple of folks let me know that Venn diagrams were developed around the 1880s by John Venn, 1834 to 1923. They're used to teach elementary set theory. Very good. Basically, they're a graphic way of showing how different concepts, numbers, ideas, objects can be arranged in a way that easily and intuitively shows their commonalities and differences. They were proposed to develop to illustrate propositions, the shareable objects of attitudes and the primary bearers of truth and falsity. And if we didn't need something more so about our lives, it would be for truth and falsity. So my thanks to Susan Cosino, who was actually the soil scientist I talked about. It's great when you start doing this work because a lot more people start, like, they reconnect with what you do, and they have a lot of connections. So thanks so much for her pointing that out as well. She does a great soil science business, so if anybody's in the interior or wants a great soil science test, they can contact her as well. But no more questions for me, Karin, so unless you had anything else you wanted to chat about, we might just wrap up.
I think that's good. I love also how you have figured out your path in permaculture and your many businesses. I think that's inspiring for folks to see.
I'll only say I know it now. I just had another strategic planning session last night, and I can tell you this much. The conversation we have today about where I am, it'll be different a year from now, and it'll be vastly different from 5 years from now. That's the great thing about permaculture and just this field, is that you can always go deeper, you can always go a little bit further.
That's so true. Well, I'll wish you the best, and we'll stay connected, Javin.
Thanks so much, Karin. For everybody else, be fruitful, multiply, and I hope to see you somewhere out on the field. Bye now.
Thank you, Javin. Bye-bye.